I'd like to hand it over to Christian Murphy from the Bronx River Alliance to present the webinar.
Thank you, Emily. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Murphy. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Ecology and Education Manager at the Bronx River Alliance. Thank you for joining us this morning to listen to me talk. We're going to be discussing our recent experience updating the Bronx River Intermunicipal Watershed Management Plan and our efforts to make this as community-led and community-driven of a process as possible. And I hope you learned something good from this. So let's go ahead and get started. So I want to give some quick context and background to who we are as the Bronx River Alliance. We're a 501c3 nonprofit operating in the Bronx in New York City, and we are the main water protectors of the Bronx River. Our mission is to serve as a coordinated voice for the river. We work in harmonious partnership to protect, improve, and restore the Bronx River corridor to make it a healthy ecological, recreational, educational, and economic resource for all communities through which the river flows. We have a public-private partnership with the New York City Parks Department, and we have dozens of relationships with other partners across the region, be they other nonprofits or even some of our elected officials. We have good relationships with them as well. So as an alliance, we do utilize our network of connections basically for everything that we do, given the expanse of our work. This is just a quick snapshot of our history. We are celebrating 50 years of the anniversary of the Bronx River restoration. And so that was the movement to begin cleaning out the Bronx River and restoring it. Is really the foundation of our work, that we continue the legacy of grassroots volunteer efforts to get that started. And so that was in the 1970s, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. But we always want to honor the legacy of the folks that came before us to begin the hard work of bringing back this river to life from the state that it was in the last century. So here's a quick snapshot of the Bronx River watershed to get us grounded. It's a 23-mile long river. The headwaters of the Bronx River are just below the Kensico Dam in Valhalla, New York. And the river flows straight south all the way to the East River, where it empties out between Hunts Point and Soundview in the Bronx. This is New York City's only true freshwater river. This is the only place where you can find flowing fresh water within city boundaries. And so it's a very unique space. And as you can imagine, faces a lot of pressure from the urban development that was built up around it, especially in south of southern Westchester County and the Bronx itself. So a lot of work to do to keep the river healthy and alive. And that is kind of sort of setting the stage for why we were developing these big watershed plans in the first place. But before we get into that, I want to discuss a little bit about why the Bronx River has as many disadvantaged communities as it does around its banks. Sort of some of that history, I think, is really important to remember why certain aspects of the landscape look the way they do. And we can't really talk about disadvantaged communities in the Bronx and in southern Westchester without talking about redlining and disinvestment. And if you're not aware, this was a policy in the last century that would give different neighborhoods and areas of major cities across the country these worthiness grades, right? So whether or not they were worth investing in. And that was truly based off of who lived in those neighborhoods. And so what we saw, and as you can imagine, is that communities that were primarily communities of color were given really poor ratings. And so if you were a business or a real estate mogul or something, you were looking to, develop in different parts of the city, you wouldn't want to be developing in the areas that have been redlined. And so these areas saw services leave, they were stripped of resources, and kind of left to just fend for themselves, which caused property values to crash, caused other industries to move in onto the cheaper land. And so a lot of that was energy generation or transportation infrastructure, but mainly industries that were causing a lot of pollution to enter the air, to pollute the water. And so we have folks who are already low income and already, struggle to meet some of their basic needs, now having to live next to these facilities and locations that were causing further harm to them. And we still see this happening today in New York and in other cities all across the country. And so this is kind of the background context, a little bit of why the Bronx River Corridor suffered as much as it did. These developments hit the corridor pretty hard. And so these are some shots from 1948 and the 1960s. This is kind of just a quick look at what the Bronx River looked like in the southern portion back in those days. Pretty unrecognizable, very degraded habitat, terrible air quality, things that were pretty awful compared to the way that the river had been kept for centuries as a water body that was so pristine that the city had once considered it as a source of drinking water. It had been turned into an open sewer and a garbage disposal system. Then in the 1970s, the environmental movement took hold in the United States. The first Earth Day was held, and this really inspired Watershed residents in the Bronx who were moved to take matters into their own hands and begin clearing out the debris that had built up into the river and try to turn it from being a landfill into a natural resource. And so the Bronx River Restoration Group was formed. This was really grassroots. No one was getting paid to do this. There was even sort of minimal PPE to get this work done. And these folks were so intrepid that they actually got the attention of larger agencies like the New York City Parks Department. But eventually they did, in fact, get the attention of the Army Corps of Engineers. And so that's who's removing this sort of decomposing car that's being taken out of the river in this picture on the right. And this really kind of sets the stage for our work today to continue the legacy of removing pollution and restoring the river and trying to restore the natural habitat that used to exist along the banks. This is just a quick look at that same location today. And so this is Concrete Plant Park in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx. This is one of our flagship parks. It was a brownfield and was converted into one of our most popular parks along the Bronx River, where we do a lot of programming. We activate this space a lot. And so these are people who were dreaming about this future for the Bronx River, and we're helping to make it happen. And we're still helping to make it happen today. We're not done dreaming and visioning. There's much more work to be done, but it's always good to recognize how much work has been done so far. A lot of that is thanks to plans like the Watershed Plan, which are very collaborative and include multiple components to try to holistically look at opportunities for improvements in the watershed. So there have been a number of plans written in the early 2000s with various entities and other collaborators, but the 2010 Bronx River Intermunicipal Watershed Management Plan was the largest endeavor that we had done to date. It was done in collaboration with dozens of other entities, including our partners with New York City Parks, New York City Department of Environmental Protection, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and many, many others. We had a lot of help, actually, from the New York Attorney General's office, who was really instrumental in getting other folks from Westchester County to the table. And so this was a really collaborative effort to work with all of the representatives from each different kind of corner of the watershed to put together this watershed plan. It was essentially a guiding document that was going to take us through about 10 years or so of restoration work on the Bronx River. This plan included 53 priority projects, and to date, 45 have been completed, so quite successful. And some of the main focuses of this 2010 plan were to address disturbed hydrology, the poor water quality that we're seeing in many different parts of the river, aging infrastructure, especially as it pertains to wastewater infrastructure, invasive vegetation, degraded habitat, and just dams and general aquatic connectivity. Now, there is a very important topic that is missing from this list, and I will get to that in a few minutes, but it's very important. There's actually a big gap here that this original 2010 plan did not address. But the plan overall was very successful and did carry us through about a decade of work. This is the Soundview Lagoon, the very bottom of Soundview Park. This is the southernmost park on the Bronx River. On the left, this was an area with up to 12 feet of landfill that had built up over the decades. And the plan included this proposal to restore the salt marsh to this area. And that was done successfully. This is about 3.5 acres of restored salt marsh in the South Bronx. This is the gateway to the river, and this is a huge refuge for wading birds during the warm months. So a very successful proposal that the plan introduced. The plan also covered sort of restoration projects like habitat connectivity. And so this was a fish passage that was built over the southernmost dam on the Bronx River. That dam had been built in the 1600s. And so the connection between the freshwater sections of the river and the ocean had been cut off for almost 400 years. And the plan helped us to accomplish this really remarkable project. What you're seeing in the image on the right is an alewife herring. And so this is the fish that spawns in freshwater but lives in the ocean. And with the construction of this fish passage, this species has been able to access their spawning grounds in the freshwater portion of the river for the first time in centuries. And so this has allowed us to do some fish stocking and monitoring of the species, and has helped to transform part of the ecosystem of the Bronx River. So the plan was really, really amazing for these kinds of projects, really focused on the natural aspects of the river, fixing habitat, and providing some access to the waterfront for the communities. There was a lot of attention paid to stormwater management. So these are two examples of bioswales that were built from proposals that were included in the watershed plan. Some large, some small. Most of the green infrastructure that we build is within the parks that we have jurisdiction over. But we do some work with the city of New York and are able to get some features sort of designed and implemented along the right-of-ways outside of our parks, but within the watershed. And so we do have a hand in some of the rain gardens and the bioswales that get built on the sidewalks that are kind of nearby the river. And there's a lot more of them that we want to do, to be doing more to capture stormwater and prevent polluted runoff from getting into the water. Now, this was something that the plan did not address in any great detail, and that is threats of climate change to the Bronx River watershed. Chief among these threats is flooding. And so the Bronx River was always a river that was considered flashy, as it had been straightened over the years to make way for highways and railways. The river's sort of tendency to flood has increased. And with climate change, introducing cloudburst events and different weather patterns, the river is flooding more frequently now and more severely. And we're really seeing a lot of issues, not just in the Bronx, but actually more specifically in Westchester County. And the areas along the Bronx River that suffer the most from flooding are actually around Yonkers and Bronxville, kind of the confluence with one of the tributaries of the river, the Sprain Brook, which joins just in that area. And this is where we're seeing some of the most severe flooding in the watershed. So these are very real issues that the watershed communities have been dealing with for years. They're getting worse. And the plan really didn't mention climate change. It seems hard to believe, but in 2010, that was not the biggest priority for us and for our partners who helped to produce the 2010 plan. There was no discussion of addressing the urban heat island effect, either in the Bronx or in Westchester County. No mention of environmental justice at that point at all. And no mention of the consideration that individual communities have different needs or are facing different risks in the watershed. There wasn't much of a discussion of public access either, and so that's one of the things that is really important to us and that we talk about a lot, is our efforts to create more waterfront park access and green space access, especially in disadvantaged communities in the watershed. That was not really a priority for the 2010 plan. And generally speaking, the plan had very insufficient goals around floatables management. I wanted to include a picture here to show why that was such a gap in the planning, as floatables are a huge issue on the Bronx River. It's one of the measures of water quality that has the Bronx River listed as impaired. It's partially impaired for floatables, among other things. And so these are big gaps that we needed to address, and we're looking to an updated watershed plan in order to meet those needs. So just driving this point home just a little bit more, these are the impacts of how we've developed the Bronx on individual communities. The South Bronx has one of the highest asthma rates in America. It's often called Asthma Alley because of the concentration of polluting infrastructure. And again, these are largely areas that are low income. They are predominantly communities of color. And so they have less of an ability to respond to risks and issues, versus other folks in the city who are more affluent and have more of an ability to make use of their resources. And one of the other issues is that there's been a lack of investments for environmental protections in the Bronx and in the Bronx River watershed. Folks might be familiar with the Harbor and Tributary Study, which was led by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This is looking at really novel engineering solutions to protecting the New York City metro region from damaging storm surge from a hurricane or other large coastal storm. And the Army Corps' proposal essentially left the Bronx out of the picture, or intentionally designated the Bronx as a sort of sacrificial zone. So whereas other areas of the city were kind of over planned and overbuilt up in this proposal, almost nothing was designed for the Bronx. And this is not, was not unusual. It was disappointing, but not unusual to see that there was not enough being done to protect the Bronx waterfront. And so these were all things that were being considered as we began the process of updating the watershed management plan for the river, not just for habitat connectivity, not just for the sake of wildlife, but also now thinking about how do we make a plan that is kind of holistically, comprehensively meeting the needs of our watershed residents, and thinking about their well-being and their quality of life and their experiences living within the watershed. So we agreed that some of the main goals for the plan were to reaffirm a shared vision for watershed management, integrating the objectives and priorities identified in the 2010 Bronx River Intermunicipal Watershed Management Plan with new climate change and environmental justice priorities, and to encourage a unified approach to watershed management for all municipalities, organizations, businesses, and residents within the Bronx River watershed. And so we were able to secure some funding from the New York State Department of State. This funding went to our colleagues at the Westchester County Department of Planning, and we were a subaward to actually get this work done. So we're very thankful for that. Some of the more specific goals for the updated plan were, of course, to address climate change and develop strategies for climate change resilience. So in particular, flooding management and mitigating the urban heat island effect, but also considerations for air quality, which we know is connected to climate change. Definitely a stronger focus on waterfront access and community connectivity. Long-term management strategies to make sure that the work continues and projects that have been built are continually given maintenance, so that they will continue to perform and keep the river healthy and clean. And then consideration for the vision of the Bronx River, which just broadly speaking is to create a fishable, swimmable river, which currently the river is not. And that is our vision, and that is something that we hope we can get closer to achieving through this updated plan. This is just a quick look at the timeline for the plan. The contract was awarded in fall 2022, and we hired a consultant who came on, Boomi Environmental, who has done a lot of work in the New York City region, had actually done work on the Bronx River previously. And so they came into this process with a lot of knowledge about the Bronx River and the watershed, which was great. And so we really hit the ground running when that consultant came on. And then we held lots of project meetings and input sessions between the spring of 2023 and the summer of 2024. I'll get more into all these details soon. Lots of reviews of the draft products during that time between the summer of 2023 and 2024, and then final reviews with recommendations and last minute edits coming in through the fall of 2024. And then the plan was just published in December. And so it was a long process and had many, many moving parts. And I'm excited to share some of those aspects with you all. Hopefully to inspire other watershed plans as well. And so the funding included considerations for sort of different components of this new watershed plan. And one of the things that we did pay for pretty quickly was a geomorphological study of the Bronx River. And so looking at the river's shape, essentially, how it had been channelized, whether or not there was access to the floodplain, and how the different impacts of urbanization sort of lead to different behaviors and responses from the river itself. Really, so a study of the river's hydrology and how it's been impacted by human development. As I mentioned before, the river has been straightened. A lot of the banks have riprap, so you know those big boulders, and sometimes they're set in concrete. And so all those things impact the river's behavior and its tendency to flood. The purpose of the study, of course, was to look at the existing channel stability or instability in some cases, the health of the aquatic habitat and recreational activities, and really looking for opportunities to reduce flooding and manage erosion. Huge study. It was 2 volumes. It's hundreds of pages long. But this component helped to develop the list of priority projects from the new plan. So looking at these opportunities and then creating proposals to address that. Through the funding, we were also able to work with the New York City Natural Areas Conservancy. This is a nonprofit that operates kind of within the New York City Parks Department. And they really are an incredible team of people, scientists, studying the natural areas of New York City, looking at things like forest health, water quality, you know, all those natural aspects that folks don't always think about in a big city, but certainly exist and certainly need to be evaluated and maintained. And so for this, the Natural Areas Conservancy conducted some invasive vegetation surveys kind of in the mid-watershed near the boundary between the Bronx and Westchester County, looking for the populations of invasive species, kind of what those compositions are, and where there's higher and lower priority locations to be addressing this invasive vegetation, and then where there would be good opportunities to do native plantings and management of those spaces. So that was another sort of resource that we were able to draw from as we were developing priority restoration actions in the plan. But the most interesting aspects of this process were really how we convened the sort of small army of people that helped us to update this plan. And so this included reconvening the Watershed Advisory Committee, which we lovingly call the WAC. This was first convened for the 2010 plan, and then kind of reconvened with new relationships for this updated plan. We were able to get representatives from 11 of, I think, think 11 of the 12 municipalities in Westchester County. I don't know if that's quite the accurate number, but I know we were missing maybe one or two smaller municipalities at the table, but for the most part, almost everyone was there. These included mayors and town supervisors, and if there was environmental committees or green committees, a lot of them joined this process as well. So really great to get so many perspectives and hear folks' priorities as they, came to the table discussing what it was that they wanted from the plan. In addition to the municipal representatives, we also had many agencies represented. This included the Bronx Borough President's Office, New York City Parks, the Mayor's Office, and many others, both locally and regionally. Um, and yeah, we had 3 virtual meetings with the WAC, kind of bracketing the process with a check-in in the middle. And sort of our main focuses for convening the WAC, especially early on, were to align on the vision and the goals for the plan, and then to begin discussing locations of concern or areas that needed to be targeted with restoration projects. And of course, further down in the process, the WAC was very instrumental in reviewing drafts and giving feedback and recommendations, um, and helped to refine the final drafts of the plan. This is a screenshot from one of the meetings. We were utilizing tools such as Jamboard as kind of an easy way to get a lot of information in a short period of time. And so our WAC committee members were discussing issues, making some suggestions for what could be done to address those issues. What was interesting was learning about things that had been attempted in the past that didn't work. So there were a number of things that folks had discussed that in previous years, their municipalities had attempted to do to address different things from pollution to flooding. Just tactics that didn't work out. And so good wisdom to carry with us as we were going through this process to not repeat things that were not going to be valuable uses of our time, and to focus on things that maybe hadn't been done but seemed like good ideas. So this kind of was good to get at the very beginning of the process and kind of get the ball rolling with a lot of the analyses that we did. And then the other component was engaging the rest of the community. So we engaged folks from pretty much every uh, municipality and neighborhood along the Bronx River as we could. And we also worked with 17 other local and regional partners, and this included institutions like the Bronx Zoo and the New York Botanical Gardens. It included a lot of the nearby universities, and then lots of our partners as well. Because we felt that everyone's perspective was valuable and that everyone was going to bring something important that we needed to consider. And so the Watershed Advisory Committee and then the rest of these stakeholders were engaged in very similar processes, sort of discussing issues and looking for opportunities. So one of the activities that we did to reach a wider audience, because we understood that not everyone would be able to make it out to a public input meeting or could even join us virtually for a virtual meeting. Sort of the way of addressing that passively was through public input surveys. These were distributed in print, and there was also virtual formats as well, just to make them as accessible as possible. They were translated into 5 languages. And so we specifically had funding in this grant to get more language access, and we reviewed the most common languages that were spoken across the watershed after English. And so those included Bengali, French, Haitian Creole, Portuguese, and Spanish. And we actually had the survey available in all of those languages to sort of maximize the number of responses that we got. The survey was very qualitative. It was asking questions like, in recent years, have you experienced more heat, like more hot days in your neighborhood? Or have you experienced more areas of flooding in your neighborhood? Do you have to walk around like larger puddles after it rains and things like that? Sort of looking at where there were collections of people sort of saying the same thing as a way of informing where there might be higher priority areas in the river that need to be addressed. We advertised the survey at pretty much every public event that we did during this time period. Any virtual meeting we did, we would always put up the virtual flyer. And so it was kind of the update of the plan is we were talking about a lot. And so community members at some point probably got sick of us talking about the watershed plan. But we were trying to reach any and every interested individual as possible because we wanted full representation from the watershed, but in particular from the environmental justice communities. So we did receive more than 400 responses, these representing more than 70 zip codes across the entire watershed, all 23 miles of it. And so we were able to sort of look at the sort of spatial distribution of the responses and see what people were saying. Even if they weren't coming to meetings to talk to us, they were giving information through the survey. And so we did identify some patterns in climate vulnerability when lots of respondents would say that they were experiencing the same thing in the same location. It was a pretty easy way of identifying there was a need there. And we were able to cross-reference these with flooding and heat maps and disadvantaged community maps to sort of verify these priorities. And then for folks who were able to engage with us in person, we held 3 public input sessions in the upper watershed, the mid watershed, and the southern part of the watershed. And so as 2/3 of the river flows through Westchester County, that meant that we were engaging a lot of folks in the county. And so we had 2 meetings there. The first one was in White Plains, that kind of kicked us off with this process. And then we held another meeting in Mount Vernon and then in the South Bronx. And we did as much outreach and advertising as we could to drive as much attendance to these meetings as possible. They were very successful. We had a lot of good turnout. The Bronx turnout was actually quite surprising. It was very well attended by community members. The Mount Vernon one, for some reason, not as much. A lot of good turnout from sort of the municipal officials and other folks who work on the ground in Mount Vernon. They came out to the meeting, which was great. They had excellent insight, but we wanted more just regular community members there. So one of the things we realized was maybe that our outreach in Mount Vernon or in the southern watershed wasn't maybe the best, or not, maybe the advertising wasn't as clear of what this was for, since the White Plains and the South Bronx meeting were really well attended. So we're still not sure why the turnout in Mount Vernon wasn't as good, but we did get good feedback through these processes, and so we were still able to utilize this as a resource. Folks were able to share their concerns, their priorities, their desires for what they wanted out of the plan. We did mapping activities. We broke up into breakout sessions based off of topic, and so folks were able to join a session and then rotate and go to another session during the evening. And so these were topics looking at climate change risks and building resilience, stormwater management and water quality improvements, and then waterfront accessibility, habitat restoration, and nature-based solutions. And so people divided themselves based off of their interests and experiences, and gave great feedback on those. And so we were utilizing all of these things to build out a climate resilience strategy. This was actually one of the sort of essential components for this plan. So synthesizing the survey inputs, synthesizing the things that people discussed in the breakout groups, all that information was used to help generate this strategy to holistically address different issues in different parts of the watershed. And this is where I think our consultant, Boomi Environmental, really shone brightly, was through this process. They were really, I would say, had a great attention to detail. There's a lot of important things that they considered when we were sort of putting together the strategy, and that included looking at things like vulnerable infrastructure, so not even just the threat to well-being of residents, but also um, how threats from climate change impact things like transit infrastructure, energy generating facilities, access to a hospital, right? Things that um, maybe folks don't always think about, but in an emergency, in a weather emergency, um, things that if you lose access to, can become quite detrimental. So, um, really, with Boomi, we were trying to leave no stones unturned as it came to looking for opportunities to protect our watershed residents. Um, and one of those things was looking at where the disadvantaged communities were concentrated, of course. Um, so this is kind of how we determined where the most at-risk communities were. We took a look at the highest hazard areas, so areas that were the most vulnerable to um, things like flooding and urban heat island effect, and then multiplied that by the social vulnerability, and so the different factors that can designate a community as an environmental justice community. And so multiplying that by the hazards gives you the risk, right? So which areas have the most risk, have the least ability to respond and adapt to changing situations. So that was cross-referenced with our survey responses, and we saw that they were actually pretty well correlated with each other. Almost 60% of respondents across the watershed were experiencing worse sort of situations from rain events. And these were certainly concentrated in those at-risk areas. You can see there on the map, the green dots are clustered. There's a pattern there. Um, Same thing with severe heat during the summer. Many residents actually across the entire watershed reported that they were experiencing a lot of heat and also didn't have a good way to cool off and keep themselves comfortable and safe and their families. And most of these were from the Bronx communities. And as we recognize that excessive heat is becoming a bigger killer as climate change gets worse, this is certainly something that we are concerned about and wanted to address with this plan. And so, with the help of Boomi Environmental and with recommendations from the WAC and from community members, we began to put together proposals and projects that would be addressing these issues in these high-risk areas. The highest risk census tracts were in Mount Vernon, the Bronx, White Plains, and Yonkers. These are also the most densely built up areas of the watershed, so not too many surprises there. A lot of attention paid to green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, but of course also considering gray infrastructure as well. And so all in all, we were actually able to generate 169 new priority restoration projects, so more than, well, I guess, yeah, and tripling actually the number of projects that were included in the 2010 restoration plan. These projects were looking at habitat connectivity and flooding mitigation, but also policies, outreach efforts, long-term strategies to ensure that the work continues successfully. A more holistic approach than what the first plan had done. The plan included 12 strategies to outline sort of this framework to manage short and long-term goals. And so each one of these strategies kind of took a look at a different aspect of restoration work, these best management practices. And then, of course, recommendations for keeping close contacts with the WAC, developing sort of infrastructure there to make sure that we can still convene meetings and seek input and recommendations and feedback when we need it from that committee. And then, very importantly, recommendations for database management and tracking project progress so that we can get an understanding of how successful the guidance from this plan will end up being over the next 10 years and be able to do more succinct evaluations of that and identify any gaps or needs that have been left open from this plan. So we're very proud of this work. We were very happy that we were able to engage our community as much as we did, and try to make this as community-led as possible, so that folks could be voicing their opinions and have a seat at the table for as much of this as we could provide them. It was well received. It's a really wonderful watershed plan. I've read it cover to cover at least twice. It's very long, but really looks at every single thing that we can be doing to help keep this river clean and beautiful, and to build more access to it so that our watershed communities can also thoroughly enjoy it to its full extent. This is just a quick snapshot from one of the project tables at the back of the plan. This is kind of how it's broken out. And so you'll see that there's the column for strategies addressed, location for where these strategies will be implemented. And so you'll notice things like porous parking and parking lots, but also playground retrofits in a lot of the nearby public schools. So, looking under every single rock for an opportunity to be capturing stormwater and building up more tree canopy and whatever else we can be doing to improve the health of the watershed. So we're excited. This is going to take us through another decade of work on the Bronx River. There's mechanisms in place for us to be collaborating with others. And we're looking forward to even more amazing projects and things being built over the next 10 years. And so with that, I will leave you with this quick plug. If you'd like to learn more about the work that we do and some upcoming opportunities to volunteer with us, please feel free to visit our website at www.bronxriver.org, where you can find our events calendar and find different ways of getting involved. And I'll plug 2 upcoming events that we have. On Saturday, April 26th is our Earth Day open house. This takes place at our office in Starlight Park at Bronx River House. And it's a really amazing family-friendly kind of day to do different activities. Starts our paddling season, so when we put folks back on the water for the year. That's kind of the first year that we do it. And then on May 10th is our annual flotilla fundraiser, which puts over 100 people on canoes and kayaks for a 4-mile paddle from the North Bronx to the South Bronx to raise money for our recreation program, which we use to provide free and low-cost paddling experiences to community members. So please feel free to check us out. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Great. Thank you so much, Christian. It was so valuable to hear the whole history of work in the Bronx River watershed and the context that this new intermunicipal watershed plan is taking place in. So, okay, so if you have questions for Christian, please use the Q&A box and we'll take those as they come in. And to get us started, I have a question. So with the 2010 plan, you mentioned lots of implementation of the priority projects in that plan. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to how the implementation of those projects worked. Did the Bronx River Alliance play a leadership role in that process? Was there sort of a project management component? And then based on that past success, how you're looking to implement the new priorities with the new plan that just came out?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Bronx River Alliance did lead a lot of the efforts to build out those projects after the first plan. But we have really great connections with the New York City Parks Department and with other agencies. And so some of those plans were actually picked up and worked on kind of not independently of us, but without us leading. And I think that was really thanks to the good work we did to build the relationships with the first convening of the Watershed Advisory Committee. We had a lot of support from the Bronx Borough President's Office, and the New York Attorney General was also very much a warm contact for us back in those days. And so it was kind of easier for us to be doing this work and seeking support with getting projects designed and built out. We're hoping that with the new plan, we'll actually be able to continue those close relationships. And in particular, we're looking to some of our institutional partners like the New York Botanical Garden, who is doing their own visioning for the watershed, And we're hoping that we can actually lean on them for some support as well. But yeah, I would say keeping in contact with those folks helps to ensure that we always have that network of support to get the new things built. And I would say it's a very important thing for any folks advocating for a watershed to be able to build those relationships and increase the expertise and skill set that's available to them.
Great, thank you. A lot of watersheds have plans from that circa 2010 era who are interested in updating and creating new watershed plans. Do you have any advice for them on ways that you are able to use that 2010 plan as a baseline? Or you mentioned some of the key gaps that were missing, but any recommendations on how to approach an update of a perhaps outdated watershed plan?
Yeah, I think one of the things that drove the process for us was seeing where new problems had appeared. So, uh, the parkway getting flooded in specific areas, like year after year, people's basements getting flooded, like that, becoming more of a pattern. So, seeking those answers, right? Asking the community where they were seeing those issues as a jumping off point. If folks are like looking for where they should begin for a process like this, that's a great place to start because that will inform you where people are desiring some kind of solutions to the things that they're experiencing. Um, Scientific resources that are available. We utilized the New York City Panel on Climate Change. They put out research on climate projections every so often. And so looking at things like that, where uh, cloudburst flooding is predicted to get worse, for example, like those can also be jumping off points if that's what you're trying to address with a plan. Um, maybe your issue is point source pollution. Maybe that's where you start. So just getting all those resources together to see like where is there a need, and then going from there. I think that's what worked for us.
Great, thank you. We also get a lot of questions from watershed groups that are interested in and concerned about flooding in their watersheds. And I know, like you mentioned, many of the previous watershed plans had more of that water quality focus as opposed to the flooding with water quality with access. And so I'm wondering if you found, we know many climate adaptation plans happen at a municipal scale, if there was any elements of more municipal scale climate adaptation work that fed into the watershed plan, or how the watershed approach might be different from those other scales of planning?
Yeah, that's another great question. Our colleagues at Westchester County um, Department of Planning, they made this a big priority. So even external to this process of updating the plan, there were other studies that were done on flooding, on the hydrology of the river. Um, I think there's probably at least three. One of them is being worked on right now with the DEC, looking at flooding in particular. So perhaps we just are fortunate to be operating in a space where this has been recognized as such a priority. Because outside of the geomorphological study that we have, there's also additional plans and studies that have been done that we were able to draw from. So yeah, if there aren't resources available, like analyses of flooding, I think it's possible to reach out to contacts with the DEC or contacts at a county sort of decision makers in the county to see if resources can be applied for that if they haven't already been. Um, but yeah, I think that we were really fortunate that a lot of that work had already been done.
That's great, thank you. And of all the strategies and actions in the new plan, is there one or two that you're particularly excited about implementing as a next step?
I'm really excited to keep centering the community and keep making that a priority. The plan has recommendations for how to continue to engage folks on a consistent basis. One of the challenges that we experienced actually with updating the plan was actually figuring out what had been done from the 2010 plan. Um, and not a critique to anybody, but the record keeping wasn't great. So it was difficult actually to figure out what we had already accomplished because we didn't want to be redundant with the new plan. And so there are considerations to avoid that happening in the future, and recommendations for those mechanisms to streamline that process, to make it more efficient, and to make evaluating um, things that are being built or proposed more simple. So I'm excited to uh, do more work there, to build up those databases and project tracking. And that makes it easier for us to collaborate on these proposals as well. Yeah, that's one thing that sticks out to me.
That's great. And can you speak a little bit more to that process? Because I know when you do a plan and you put it out into the world and you've got all these partners, they may implement a piece. Is there a way that you can follow up and find out if those projects have been implemented?
Yeah, so we are planning on maintaining regular communications with the Watershed Advisory Committee. We have advisory teams at the Bronx River Alliance that we utilize, um, that are kind of external to the organization. They're kind of like more boots on the ground, and they involve more community sort of perspectives. And this work gets shared in those spaces a lot. And those spaces also introduce policymakers as well. And so there's always a way to be communicating with folks who might be building out some of this work. And so working that in, making sure that we keep those lines of communication open, and that we are regularly and intentionally reconvening these collaborators as much as possible, so that we're not going to miss anything. They have access to the spreadsheets and things that we're working with, and so hopefully that will be a great way to start to begin tracking those implementation projects.
Sounds like building and maintaining strong relationships is really key to this work.
Yeah, I would say that the stronger the relationships are, the less work that any individual entity has to do, because we can distribute the leadership more effectively if we're all on the same page.
Great, thank you. What are some of the challenges you see with getting people out onto the water on the Bronx River? Are there liability concerns, limited access points, any water quality or safety concerns?
I would say all of the above. And it can be dependent on the location, but certainly access is one issue. We've been trying to address that over the last few decades, and we have built out a lot of new parks that provide access, but it's not evenly distributed. And there's definitely neighborhoods and communities where folks there's no way to really use the river or even see the river in some places. And another issue is people's perspectives on the water. Some people just don't want to get near it. They won't even come to our recreational events because they're afraid of getting into a canoe on the Bronx River. And there is pollution, of course, like that is a real concern. But the river is safe enough to use with secondary access, and breaking down that kind of long-term stigma that was around the river when it was an open sewer. It lingers today. So kind of breaking through people's assumptions and showing them that it has been largely restored. It is safe to recreate on. We have to break through that sometimes with our community. And then the pollution, of course, is an actual barrier. And there are days when we actually have to cancel our programming because there's a water body advisory and the CSOs have been too active, and we actually just have to wait for the river to flush itself. So that's also another concern.
Thank you. Another question is if you would be willing to present this information to the Bronx River Advisory Board at the Westchester County Board of Legislators. Is that a group that you've connected with? And we can connect you afterwards if not.
Yeah, I love that someone has brought up the Bronx River Advisory Board. I've kind of been looking for it for a couple of years now. Was very active, and we used to attend those meetings regularly. And then sometime in the last few years, it just kind of stopped. Those meetings stopped happening, and so I just wasn't really sure what's going on with that space. But yeah, if it is indeed being reconvened, I would certainly love to give this presentation there, and also seek their input.
Great. We'll make sure everyone's connected there.
Thank you. And I saw someone mention that the QR code on that last slide is broken, so I apologize for that. Is there a way for me to leave my email address? Yes, I think if I type it out. So if folks want to get in contact with me, I'm going to send this in the chat just so you have it. It's not how my name is spelled. There we go.
And we'll be following up with everyone too to share the recording of this presentation. Feel free to share that with other folks that you think might be interested in the content. We'll also be sharing links to the new plan so you can take a closer look yourself and see how all of the different elements have come together here.
Sounds good. I want to make one remark. I didn't say it during the presentation, but if you're going to be engaging community, you have to provide food. You need to put that in the budget. I can't stress that enough. It's really important to be able to provide food for people who are coming out in an evening after work or after school to give the input. That makes a big difference to actually be able to provide a meal to them while they're giving their time to you. It's one thing that we learned.
Thank you. Any last questions or comments for Christian? We're seeing a lot of thanks and appreciation in the chat. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
feel free to reach out to me after the fact if anything comes up. Always happy to answer questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll include that your contact information in the email follow-up as well. So that folks who can't find it in the chat can have that as well. Great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We are looking forward to our next breakfast webinar that will be on Thursday, May 8th. We've got students from the Bard College Center for Environmental Policy Graduate School who will be presenting some of their research on watershed management and planning from across the United States. They're conducting interviews with stakeholders all around the country, and we're really excited to learn from some other regions about best practices. We hope to see you at the Wavemaker Awards benefit on June 11th at the Falcon. More information there is in the chat as well. And thanks again so much, everyone. Have a great day.